I've said it before, and I'll say it however many times it takes to get the point across. The Japanese PlayStation software library is deeper than the ocean. From timeless classics that stand alongside some of the greatest 2D games from the golden era, like Xenac Neo and Little Ralph, to some of the worst games ever made, like Tomb Raider. The PS1 seems to encompass everything under the stars. And on top of all that, it also has Fox Junction. Like so many PlayStation games left in Japan, Fox Junction had the appeal of mystery. There was so little information about it online that I knew I wouldn't be able to fully grasp how it played without actually buying a copy. It claimed to be an action RPG and used 2D sprites on 3D backgrounds, and after discovering so many hidden gems on the console, I decided it was worth taking a chance on. I figured that an obscure Japanese PlayStation RPG would probably implement some quirky new gameplay system, so I should probably read the instructions this time. The pop diva Lily and composer Shiruka, along with all the famous hunters, have been invited to the festival. Keiji has an information device called the Gear Drive. You can read or replay drums and create palmata. There are 4 types of drums. Drums are displayed in 6 categories? What? I don't understand any of this. Well, I guess we're gonna have to do it the old-fashioned way and dive straight in. I mean, I've been gaming for 30 years. It can't possibly be that hard. Fox Junction begins with a commendable still-frame, fully voiced anime-style story sequence which introduces us to the main players. The protagonist is a young hunter in training named Keiji. What kind of hunter, you ask? Look guys, it's a Japanese video game. You don't ask questions, you just go with the flow. Keiji visits a fair in the recently liberated and as of yet unnamed Old City, where he does indeed discover Lily and her producer, performing for an exuberant crowd of rejects from the Renaissance Fair reenactment. But suddenly, an explosion erupts, and the 2 musicians are nowhere to be found. They've been kidnapped! I suppose it was more like a blinding flash of light than an explosion, because, you know, they'd be dead if it were. The good news is, the legendary hunter J.B. Landseeker appears on the scene, and after choosing the first person in his field of vision, he detects a powerful and just spirit inside, you guessed it, Keiji. And so your journey to recovering the lolicon and his captive begins. Once the intro is over, you're dropped in the middle of the desert with enemies shooting you from off-screen and no clue as to what you're supposed to be doing or who you're fighting against. You'd never realize it at this point, but this warm welcome to the world of Fox Junction is the perfect metaphor for everything you're about to experience. Alright, we're under fire. We need to fight back. Press the square button. Nothing! X button! Nothing! Alright, whatever, O button, hurry! But none of the buttons do anything. How the hell do I attack in this game? Do I really already have to go back to the instructions just for this? Okay, here it is. Oh ho! In order to attack, you need to hold down L or R1 and press square. I'll say it one more time so it really sinks in. In order to attack in this game, you have to hold down one of the shoulder buttons and press square. And no, it's not some kind of complicated mech simulator where you need fine, precise control over all kinds of variables. You're walking on the ground and shooting a flamethrower. Why would they make the most basic function of gameplay so unintuitive? By the time Fox Junction came out in 1998, we'd already had well over a decade to iron this out. Control pad? Move. B button or whatever is closest to your right thumb? Attack. Is it humanly possible that within literal fractions of a second from the moment the game starts, Fox Junction is proving itself to be an absolute disaster? Okay, we're not going to jump to conclusions. We don't even know what's going on yet. Now that we can attack, let's just take out these nearby enemies and get our bearings. You'll quickly discover the movement and combat, if it can be called that, is a lot more clunky and plodding than what you would expect from an action game. primarily because you're completely stationary while attacking. You can't even strafe. So you either have to shoot an enemy once, take one tiny step back to avoid their attack, and then shoot again, or for enemies who have projectiles, just spam away and accept the fact that you're gonna have to take one or two for the team. In the ass. Oh, and you don't have unlimited ammo. Shooting the flamethrower drains your gear drive meter that has to be replenished periodically with items. So now that we sort of understand how to defend ourselves and have cleared enough of an area to take a breath of relief, let's try to figure out just what the hell we're supposed to be doing. We're in some kind of space or arena. It's just one big square with some hills and walled off areas seemingly slapped on randomly, and a few blue pyramids that represent items lying on the ground here and there. There are also red pools of light on the ground, which are traps. Accidentally stepping on one will cause some kind of temporary status impediment, like slowed movement or not being able to attack. And every once in a while, they'll warp you out of the current stage. We'll get to the items in a minute. That's another big pile of doo-doo to tackle. But first of all, where are you supposed to go? What's the objective of the game? Well, there's a red transport device somewhere in the area that teleports you out of it and onto the main world map. A 10x10 grid made up of these little areas which are color-coded according to the type of terrain they feature. When you leave one, you can move to any adjacent area, excluding diagonals, but there doesn't seem to be any defining characteristic to any of them. Some are desert, some are ice, some are red, but ultimately they're just big squares where you run into enemies and pick up items. There's no indication of whether you're going the right or wrong way. I remember the instruction booklet saying something about searching for a tower. So I spend about 20 or 30 minutes wandering randomly through these little squares of tedium looking for a tower. No tower, no tower, no tower, no tower. Okay, time for plan B. If you've been brave enough to play this far in, you've probably picked up quite a few items at this point, so it's time to talk about what they do. The pause screen, aka your little information device where you manage all your equipment, is a mindfuck from an alternate dimension. There are 5 different screens to navigate: single-use items, player status, palmata, which we'll get to later, drums, which we'll get to very soon, and game settings. Items include potions that refill your life or gear drive, power-up items, single-use weapons, and mech parts. Thankfully, none of them have names related to their effect, so until you've memorized the made-up names for every single one of them, you'll need to open up the menu screen to check whether you actually got something useful or not every single time you pick up an item. Brilliant! In fact, you'll spend at least as much time looking at the menu screen as you will at the action. I remember the first time I tried to look for videos of people playing Fox Junction to get an idea of what it's like. I couldn't for the life of me understand why the person was constantly interrupting the action to go into the pause screen. Now I understand, that's just how the game is played. As for these drums, which are indistinguishable from other item types when you collect them, they're actually hints for how to play the game. Hint might not be the most accurate word for them, because hint implies something that you may or may not need. But it turns out these drums explain the basics of gameplay and the overall objective, one snippet at a time. Some of them contain messages from good old JB Landseeker explaining how to manage the myriad items and menus. Some are messages from the kidnapped musicians, which are mostly just pleas for you to hurry and save them. And finally, some of them are hints about where you need to go. They won't tell you exactly where the mysterious tower is, but they will give you ambiguous hints. For example, the coordinates of a spot on the map from where you can see the tower. So after all this running around blindly, you can now find an area where the tower is visible, figure out that it's to the east or wherever the game has randomly chosen to put it for that session, and make your way there. But if you want to have a real chance of success in Fox Junction, you'll need to understand the robot creation system, and I've put off talking about it for so long because it was such a living pain in the ass to get my head wrapped around that I know it's going to be even more annoying to explain. Remember when I mentioned something called palmata? It turns out this is a bastardization of the English words pal matter, pal as in friend. These robots, if you can manage to put one together, are infinitely stronger than Keiji and his puny little flamethrower, so you'll definitely want to make some. Ready to hear how this works? When you defeat enemies, they'll sometimes leave behind robot parts, again in the same blue pyramids as every other item. There are body parts and weapon parts. In order to make a robot, you first need to find drums that contain the blueprint or recipe for how to make them. Then you'll need to get the correct body parts, go into your gear drive, select the combine option on the correct items, and theoretically, you'll have a shiny new PAL matter. Then you go to the PAL matter screen, select a weapon for it to use, assuming you've got one, and finally you can use your robot in battle. But because the developers of Fox Junction were hell-bent on making every aspect of gameplay as clumsy and unintuitive as possible, you don't just select who you're playing as at the pause screen, nor do you switch between Keiji and the robot with the press of a button. When you hold down the L or R button, the robot comes in like a tag team partner, and of course, you have to hold it down the entire time you want to use him. This also means Keiji can't use his standard weapon while you have a PAL matter equipped. The robot has his own separate life and gear drive meters, so instead of making your life easier, you have to constantly go into the pause menu to refill his life and weapon just as before. Managing to get a robot recipe drum and both of the body parts specified rarely happens by casual play, and at first it seemed like creating one of these robots would take countless hours of grinding. And then I noticed, oh wait, those little text boxes that appear next to enemies are their names, and those names are the same as the body part names. You'll have to excuse me for not picking up on that immediately. I was a little busy trying to figure out what genre of game I'm playing while not getting my ass killed. And if that wasn't convoluted enough for you, enemies almost never drop parts unless you've allowed them to run out of ammo before you kill them. So once again, Fox Junction manages to make simple tasks take way longer than they need to. Have you digested all that? Then let's get back to the actual game objective. We were picking up hints and trying to find this tower. Once you get there, you'll discover the enemies are even stronger than usual and virtually impossible to kill without taking damage, so you'll probably end up running for your life from them to find the elevators that lead to the top. Your reward for getting there is a drum with a message that you now need to find a special blue transport device to leave the area. Once again, you'll need to pick up hints for how to find it, which are even more cryptic than the ones before. And when you finally find it, you're greeted with a boss fight. Oh my god, it's a boss! Something that actually resembles a real video game. I hate to be the one to spoil this, but the excitement is short-lived. Because this is, objectively, the most tedious boss fight in the history of gaming. All you will do is run around to the back of it, get a few hits in, and repeat before it can rotate enough to hit you with its magnet claw, delivering 1 millimeter worth of damage for every 5 or 6 attacks landed. I did this for 15 minutes, and thank God I beat it on the first try or I never would have played this game again. Fox Junction was already almost certainly the worst game I've ever played in my life, but I never could have dreamed that getting to a boss would make it 10 times worse. I'm trying to understand how a group of grown adults could have done this. These people were professional game designers. This was their full-time job. It's a commercial endeavor with a budget. It's a licensed game. Who would have done this? It's like me getting my master's in architecture, being commissioned to build a house, and sticking a bunch of pine needles in molten wax. It's so bad, I'm not even censoring my F-bombs for this video. So what happens after you beat this boss and leave the first 10x10 grid of Christmas lights, you ask? You're magically transported to a second grid where there are 4 towers to find. And that's it. That's literally the entire game. All this obfuscation of what to do and where to go was just a cheap way of masking the fact that there's hardly any game inside the disc. However, there is one thing about Fox Junction which, unbelievably, is awesome. The music. It's extraordinary. The tracks are jazzy, percussive, experimental, and completely unlike the type of music we often associate with 32-bit RPGs. It's so good, it almost made me enjoy playing one of the most dismally designed games I've ever come across. You know, Sometimes Japanese games include the entire staff list in the instructions. Let's check if Fox Junction does. Well, what do you know? It does. So who were the composers? Let's see. Motohiro Kawashima. No, it can't be. Oh my god, it is. Yuzo Koshiro wrote music for Fox Junction. One of the most long-standing and respected game music composers of all time. A living legend. Yuzo motherfucking Koshiro wrote music for Fox Junction. And the other two composers are no slouches either. I just emphasized Yuzo Koshiro because he's so well known, but Kawashima has worked together with him for years and is every bit as responsible for the music in Streets of Rage as Koshiro. The third person listed, Ryuji Iuchi, wrote music for a little game you may have heard of called Shenmue. Yeah, this is a superstar team. It turns out the voice actors were also very well known and respected people. The person who voices Keiji, Issei Miyazaki, did voices for the TV anime inceptions of Cardcaptor Sakura and Pokemon, while the person behind JB Landseeker, Shuichi Ikeda, is a legend of the industry whose portfolio goes all the way back to the 70s Gundam anime. After spending all that money hiring legendary voice actors and composers, it isn't hard to imagine how much would have been left to pay the people who actually provide the most important part of the game, the programmers. Fox Junction is an outstanding example of what happens when game developers dedicate too much of their budget to getting famous names on the back of the box, and end up skimping the actual game part. It becomes a beautiful package with a fart on the inside. In 30 years of gaming, I've never seen such an unintuitive, needlessly cryptic, and utterly pointless creation, both in story and gameplay. But it does take the crown for bad games with great music, beating out even the former champion Crossweaver on the PC Engine. So, I'm thankful it exists. Well, for better or for worse, and it's definitely for better, I'm done with Fox Junction for now. Just to be safe, we'd better save our progress before turning it off. There are 2 save options. I wonder what the difference is. Oh wait, don't choose that one. That's the one that sends you back to the beginning of the stage and takes away all of your items.